young boy, shrouded within the mist of a tall and dim forest, searching for a friend, stops to rest. Two fairies, Tattle and Tail, spot the young Hylian, and with a melodic chime, their intent and his fate is decided. They fix a startled young boy's steed, raising him from its back and rendering the boy unconscious. And then, from the mist, an apparition appears, an imp bearing an ill omen of a tattered, wicked mask. He approaches the boy, kicking his stagnant body upon its back. The Skull Kid inspects the cadaver for valuables, and he finds a curious trinket, an ocarina. The resonant hum of the instrument spills out into the air as Tattle and Tail bicker over what will become of it. But then, the young Hylian awakes, stammering to his feet to the shock of the Skull Kid. He only sizes him up. Nevertheless, in the ensuing struggle, both startled fairies and imp flee upon Epona. But as if instinctive, the boy hurls himself at the alarmed horse, clinging for dear life as he is dragged throughout the forest floor. But despite his courageous resolve, he cannot hold on forever. And with a sharp turn and sudden jolt, young Link is finally thrown from his loyal companion. Still though, the boy quickly scrambles to his feet. He runs, tumbles, and hurdles his way through woods and meadow alike, all the while wondering where that Skull Kid may have fled. Abruptly, he is met with the chamber of a dark and hollowed tree, but Link, in such anger and haste, fails to catch his weight and stumbles off the edge, and now he is falling for what seems like an eternity, falling down that infinitesimally black chasm, that great dark, falling undoubtedly toward his demise. Despite all this, Link somehow lands upon Deku Flower, sunken into the wood's depth, remarkably unscathed. But then and there sits the Skull Kid, hovering ominously above the ground, smug and conceited. This is his checkmate. A blistering darkness engulfs the room, along with the chattering laughter of malignant force. Then rustling louder and louder now, Link is cornered all around by Deku soldiers, and in a desperate attempt he runs as fast as he can, any direction now, just away from their torment. Sprinting into the void, he appears from his daze, Skull Kid, Tattle and Tail, everything still there, only taller, larger, or rather he, smaller. Link peers into the puddle of water in front of him, and to his horror, he is no longer there. Only a scrawny Deku reflected where he should be. The terror sinks in. Oh god, he shudders at the thought. That's him. Link has been turned into a Deku, stripped of his ocarina, his horse, his only friend, and of his last remaining humanity. Link screams. And then, a clock tower, a masked salesman, a promise, and... After everything that has transpired, just this, music and jovial townsfolk. It's disorientating and captivating. Majora's Mask has always been an uncanny sort of game, dim-lit and morbid, but simultaneously and intrinsically beautiful. It's downright dreary at times. I mean, the moon is quite literally falling. The game is ripe with themes of death and inevitability, anxiety and fear, anomie, but you can never shake this overwhelming feeling of hope. Much like being a young adult, Link finds himself in a world of duty and responsibility that is often indifferent toward him. Following the events of Ocarina of Time, Link left Hyrule broken and resenting the very citizens he had saved, and in returning to a child, the very people that Link had once sacrificed his life in protecting, they knew nothing of it. He was robbed of his childhood and offered no compensation. The story of Ocarina of Time is one of a child within an adult's body, but in Majora's Mask that is diametrically opposed. You're an adult in a child's body, struggling with the burdens of adulthood, the fear, anxiety, and self-awareness of the disarray that surrounds you, all while being stripped of your social status and therefore agency as a child. Link was not only deprived of his development, but now his future. It's the worst of both worlds, like a frosting-only cake. But through interacting with the characters in Majora's Mask, a near direct copy of their Hyrule counterparts, Link is propelled toward new perspectives and ultimately grapples with themes of abandonment, emotional maturity, and adulthood as he struggles to discern his place within the adult world of Termina. This begins an extraordinarily relatable aspect of the story. There's no stark line contrasting the adult world and that of the premature, no step you take in which one foot you're a child and the next an adult. It's rather a gray area, like the slow becoming of an adult, and oftentimes it feels like you've receded back to youth rather than progressed toward maturity. Like an adult trapped in a child's body, you grapple to find and maintain a sense of self, feigning maturity, completely and utterly lost. The city of Clocktown is occupied and alive, brimming. Colorful murals adorn its walls, and for the first time, a bright blue fills the sky. And for the first time, it is calm. But it will never last. Everything you see here, it will all keel before the dark, wither away as the world takes its final, last, and fleeting breath. My first time playing, this was beyond jarring. Link is shot out into this foreign, jovial world that is happy for the moment, yes, but dying in every sense of the word. I feel exactly as Link does. There is no going home for him, only moving inexorably forward. Coming from Ocarina of Time, it felt like I was alone again, starting from square one, and that scared me. Just imagine how traumatized and alone Link is in this moment, even separated from himself, his very own skin, and forced out into a world that is calm now, but cold and indifferent as well. Link doesn't belong here. You don't belong here. But okay, cool. Nice story, why should I care? Something so debased, abstract, and demoralizing. Why does it matter? What's the reason for this? Well, because contrary to it all, even if you don't belong, you are still here. Time is moving forward, and it will continue to do so, and there's no going home. No going back. In Erik Erikson's 8 Stages of Psychosocial Development, he outlines that often a missed feeling of loss and maturity as a varying series of crises. Identity versus role confusion, stage 5, lasting from around 12 to 18, is the identity crisis. A struggle to find our place in the world, a sense of who we are, if we belong, and most pressing, how we belong. This is arguably one of the most integral points in anyone's life. The point where you realize there is no going back. No returning to childhood days of soft embrace and warm, tender lull. You must now find a place in the adult world. It's daunting to say the least. He argues we do this through social interaction and reaction, our friends and immediate social environment, others we acquaint ourselves with, and subsequently their reactions to our person lead us to our place in the world. Ultimately, finding who you are is an individually unique experience as much as it is finding out who the people around you are as well. It's a state of juxtaposition, After all, you are the company that you keep. Every face you see is a mask you collect, a window into the self, a looking glass. The side quests of Majora's Mask are the vocal point of meaning in this, a glimmer of hope in an otherwise hopeless world. They comprise more than half the game, and for good reason. After regaining your human form and leaving Clocktown, the game offers you almost no guidance, no reward, no incentive, only a few stray hints in the form of four corners and giants. What I love about this is its agency and anonymity. It's up to you to find your way, and that freedom extends to side quests as well. No one in the game almost ever explicitly tells you to help these people, nor are rewards often directly stated. A normal quest in Majora's Mask entails finding an NPC, learning of their issue, and actively deciding that you want to help them, reward or not. Because let me tell you, some of these rewards can be fairly crappy. I mean, what the hell am I going to do with the Mask of Sense aside from sniff bed sheets? Regardless, it's the empathy that matters here. Filling the void of an otherwise empty world, helping others for the sake of doing so. No extraneous reward, no grand outcome, just people in need, focusing on the here and now. It's the compassion we share and lend to our peers that ultimately makes actions matter. Once you manage to find your way into Romani Ranch and wander around for a bit, you enter the amply named Cuckoo Shack. Fittingly, it is home to about a dozen baby chicks, all romping throughout, and this spiky-haired, eclectic punk rocker. He's sitting by the tree in the middle, visibly distressed, weary. If you choose to approach him, he explains why the longing face. You have a choice here, an opportunity, and in the face of inevitable demise, knowing full well that in the next cycle, again and again, none of this will ever matter, placating all purpose, despite all, you are given the power of choice. To help him, even though it will be written over cycle and cycle again. To be compassionate not for the sake of a promised reward or permanent closure, but purely for the sake of doing so. And so you help him. He sees those little chicks grow into fully matured roosters, and maybe they'll help him, help you, find a bit more peace as the clock ticks by, nearing closer now, to the final hour. For most, maturity and mortality go hand in hand. It's a nature of adversarial absolution. You, me, they, we are all going to grow up, and even more so die. Adulthood and subsequently loss of innocence is something we all must experience. Like a dim light at the end of a long and narrow hallway, you feel your nerves heighten as you peer into the void. And in Termina, that void can stare back, every frail grin and uncanny glare, every furrowed brow and wary longing face. You see yourself and what is coming. You see everything. And much like being a young adult, it feels like Link is the only one who understands the fallible and futile nature of his peers, everyone placating their demise rather than confronting it. Link sees what the people here too have lost and are going to lose, their lives, their childhood, their courage, and still ignorant to the cause of it all. The moon matters for what it brings. It's an indiscriminative and definitive force, a great finalizer of the land. Societal pressure might not crush them, but the moon will. Just listen to the soundtrack at the end of the third day. Less than 5 hours remain. The moon is falling. Link sees what will become of him and everyone else around him if no one does anything, and he is almost entirely alone in that. If that sounds similar to something, substitute the moon for almost any qualm with the world and it begins to get extremely familiar. Staggering, like turning to your buddy and saying, "Hey man, do you not see how messed up all this is?" It's the rising tides, the housing crisis, global warming, mass shootings, capitalism. I mean, the list is endless. Just one and it feels like the world is collapsing, let alone a litany of them. In adolescence, you expect most adults to already have a plan formulated at least, a civil and concise form of action against entropy. But growing up, you realize that they're just as lost as you are. That these adults are still just kids coming to grips with totality, and that's a terrible feeling. Like the world's ending and the odds are insurmountable. And if you don't do anything, no one else will. And the moon is falling. Like the tides are rising all around you, snuffing out every last and fleeting breath. And the moon is falling. And it fell. In J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye, the book's main character, 16-year-old Holden Caulfield, struggles to accept his loss of innocence amidst entering the adult world of post-World War II America. Holden sees this world as an ultimately depraving force, one of liars, cheaters, and manipulation. If you sat around there long enough and heard all the phonies applauding and all, you got to hate everybody in the world. I swear you did. He resents the people around him because he fears becoming them, his only solace often being a red hunting hat, his people hunting hat, a grand symbol of himself and individuality. The most shocking part of the novel comes after Holden decides to phone Mr. Antolini, his old English teacher and family friend from Elkton Prep. At this time in the story, Holden has just left his youngest sister Phoebe, one of the only people he's ever truly fond of. He doesn't want to, but he isn't supposed to arrive home until Wednesday of next week. Holden now has really been through it. Beat up by an acquaintance at Pensy, living in train car rides and hotels, beat up again by a pimp this time, all while dwindling funds become further apparent. He finally breaks under the abundant weight of it all, confiding within the professor, telling him of his disheveled state, and asking for a place to stay for the night. The professor, in response, welcomes the boy with open arms, offering him lodging and food. Holden, exhausted, readily accepts this offer in full trust, nearly collapsing on the couch after a few pieces of cake and a long, tiresome conversation. Deep in his slumber, though, I woke up all of a sudden. I don't know what time it was or anything, but I woke up. I felt something on my head, some guy's hand. Boy, it really scared the hell out of me. What it was Mr. Antolini's hand. Holden jumped to his feet, stunned at the affair, confronting his old professor and moving for the exit. Holden stood at the door for a moment, frozen, hesitating. The boy isn't sure what exactly just happened, but he's horrified. And the following line is burnt inside my head. As Holden stood by that door, his hand trembling, he tells the reader, "That kind of stuff's happened to me about 20 times since I was a kid. I can't stand it." The door shuts behind him. Now he waits for the elevator. 20 times. This is a reality for children day to day, not even covering the intersectional and disproportionality of the matter. Our world, our systems, they often codify abuse, institutionalize predation, and naturalize exploitation. This is the world that Holden sees, and it runs deep. The age of seen, not heard. And this isn't something exclusive to the time of yesteryear in the 50s. Even this very medium is not without faults. The infamous and exploitative crunch, the wage gap, lack of equity, all a bit too close to home. As a kid, I never really came to terms with the sheer brutality of this. It's daunting to say the least. No matter where you went or how far you ran, death, adulthood, the very same that Holden fears, always loomed overhead. Like a furious moon. The moon in and of itself is the epitome of inevitability. I mean, all you ever had to do was just look up and see the proverbial sword hanging over your head. And when you look up, you're inundated by this overwhelming fear and dread of impending doom. Not to mention this unnerving and conceited grin caked upon its face, supplanting emotions of fear and anxiety upon the player. The moon seemed almost omnipresent, like this world's god, and that smirk seemed to hint at one cruel joke. Whatever that joke was, it awaits us all. the third and final day, all are terrified. Some break down into hysteric fits, others finally embrace what is to come. People have gone mad. The town's swordmaster, a disciplined and stoic individual, is reduced to nothing more than a cowering hull of an old man, curled up in a ball, trembling, crying out for mercy, and there is nothing Link can do but watch. It reminds me of the first time I ever saw an adult cry when I was a child. Someone who's supposed to be strong, a protector, now needs that same protection. You're forced to mature, to take responsibility that you're not ready for. Pushed into the adult world, much the same way Link was forced to abandon his childhood, and Holden forced to become the very thing he resents. It was in that moment, in moments like that, in which you realize just how helpless you truly are. Someone who's meant to be unbreakable, a superhero, just weeps beneath your feet. And it makes you think, if even a cornerstone can crack, well, what about Link? What about Holden? What about the children who still need protecting? It seems like it's all too easy to forget the most vulnerable parts of our society. And because of that, even for the most unnecessary and perverse reasons, the world forces you to move on, even when you aren't ready for it. And no matter how hard you dig your nails into the roots of the past, they always seem to slip. And in those moments, it feels like the moon is falling, and you're lost in this foreign, vitriolic world, just trying to survive. Despite all this, almost in defiance of the cruelty of it all, Link is still kind, he's still resilient, and still shows a capacity for compassion. I find that extraordinary. Happiness isn't always an option, but that doesn't mean that suffering is there to fill the void. Actions, moments that you share with others, won't ever fill the absence of a lost childhood, but they may help you discover something new entirely. Nearing the novel's end, Holden is even more lost and dismayed than the aforementioned. He's walking with his sister Phoebe now, at first on opposing sides of the street, but soon closer, awkwardly sauntering toward each other, until they, at the end of their path, are met with a carousel. I went over and sat down on this bench, and she went and got on the carousel. All the kids kept trying to grab for the gold ring, and so was old Phoebe. And I was sort of afraid she'd fall off the goddamn horse. But I didn't say anything or do anything. The thing with kids is, if they want to grab for that gold ring, you have to let them do it, and not say anything. If they fall off, but it's bad if you say anything to them. For Holden, pushing Phoebe toward the carousel wasn't only an act of support, but a profound gesture of acceptance. In acknowledging the futility of youth, Holden discovered an endearing facet of humanity. Like an old friend or the changing of the seasons, innocence never abandons you. It only fades into new forms and new phases. And then Phoebe got off, dark looming overhead. It started to rain. She looked at Holden. What she did, it damn near killed me. She reached in my coat pocket and took out my red hunting hat, put it on my head. Holden just sat there, and he cried. I don't know why, it was just that she looked so damn nice, the way she kept going around and around in her blue coat and all. God, I wish you could have been there. The irony is that we are there, right with him, with his words in the carousel, and Phoebe in the safety of his hat. When she put that hunting cap on Holden's head, a symbol of who he is, she wasn't just empathizing with him. She was saying that in a world full of phonies, you have to be honest with yourself, because you're the only person ever truly capable of doing so. She was saying stay true to yourself, and that's where you'll find me. Find innocence. For Link and Holden, coming to terms with the apathy of adulthood took accepting the empathy of others. While maturation may be a fundamental aspect of life, that does not necessitate corruption alongside it. You may never find peace. Life will always tick on with or without you. But life is not a journey into the void, and we are not inherently creatures of destruction. Humanity is only ever as cruel as it is compassionate, and to claim otherwise is to detract from fundamental aspects of us all. Every glint of joy or love-stricken tear, every candid smile or capricious warmth amidst apathy. To claim otherwise is to withdraw from hope and submit to fear. And while life may exist on an individual basis, that doesn't mean that you have to do everything alone. We structure ourselves around others. Humanity can be the most barbaric of forces, but we are not inherently creatures of depravity. For every act of unimaginable horror, there is 1,000 tender embrace. People help people. In Majora's Mask, you can never save everyone each and every time. You are simply set up to fail. It's not fair. Everyone you see will die every time you revert back to the first day, and there's nothing you can do about it. But what you can do is make a difference in the people's lives that you meet here and now. Whether it's the moon or climate change or rising tides or whatever it is, it will kill us. We will die. But that does not mean that death dictates life. Those moments in between, like rays of light betwixt scattered rye, shine brightest when they're here and now. It's all there ever is, and all you'll ever get. Present. And you decide